Bennett, I'm 26. I work for Cape Union Mart, and early last year I spent 25 days trying to survive on an island off Thailand. And the reason that I include that I work for Cape Union Mart is because inevitably the first question is, what type of company would ever give you 35 days paid leave to do something as ridiculous as this? Okay, so it was in Thailand. It was a cooperative survival challenge as opposed to a competitive, thank goodness. There was no voting off. 10 people from all different parts of the globe dumped onto one island with the single goal, survive for as close to 30 days as possible. And I only made 25, but I wasn't complaining when I left. And it's probably worth mentioning that although there were many traumatic and distressing experiences on the island itself, nothing compared to the trauma of trying to convince my mother that it was a good idea for me to go and do it in the first place. We did a fair amount of research before we left. 2 months prior to leaving, we were researching the fauna and flora of the island, what we could eat, what could eat us. But the best part of the whole experience, in terms of the preparation itself, were the 2 days before we actually left the island, because that's when we decided what we were going to take with us. Now, each survivor was given a 5-litre bag, which is, about a quarter of a pillowcase. 25 days. 5-litre bag. Many of you guys will know if you pack for a trip or expedition, it's quite a difficult task. When you've got these two factors to consider, the decision-making process is quite alarming. But we got that right, and we headed off to the island. 34 hours of traveling from Cape Town, 2-hour boat ride to the island. From the distance, it looked incredible. It looked like everything I'd imagined. It was uninhabited, apparently. It was 4 by 10 kilometers. It was tropical. It was completely beautiful. It was a marine reserve. Thought to myself, it's going to be just like Survivor. It's going to be just like those lost episodes that I've seen on TV. But quickly discovered that all that is glitters is not gold. And as we drove closer to the island, as we stepped onto the beach, we realized that it was actually covered in rubbish, which was most distressing. You wouldn't need to walk further than 10 meters to find an empty receptacle in which to put your liquid, which from a survival aspect was wonderful, but from an environmental aspect was rather concerning, that you've got this marine reserve which is supposedly uninhabited, yet mankind had still managed to grub it with his dirty paws. So from that perspective, it was a little bit disheartening. As I'm sure you can appreciate, there are a number of dangers associated with surviving for 25 days on an island. Thankfully, we had one of the survivors was the doctor, and we also had a small device, not a Garmin, which actually communicated with the support crew back at the mainland. And any survivors will tell you one of the first things to do is you find rescue, preferably H2O, and then shelter. And I'm going to start with the shelter. I'm not particularly handy when it comes to building things. I'm not Bob the Builder, but I tried my best Bear Grylls impersonation. I got a whole bunch of logs together, made this wonderful little shelter. I used black plastic bags and palm fronds between a big boulder and a tree. And that night at 12:30, when it started to rain, which is what happened almost every single night, and you're sleeping in a hammock, so you've got no protection, jumped out my hammock, ran down the beach, arrived at the shelter, only to find 2 lovely other survivors already occupying the space that I'd created for myself earlier that day. And considering that both of them had been quite conspicuous in their absence during the building process of this said shelter, you can imagine how chuffed I was at 12 a.m. or at 12 at night. And what made it even worse is one of the survivors had managed to deposit a small amount of vomit in the sand just next to her, so the one area where I might have sat actually wasn't an area to sit at all. All right, H2O, obviously you want to stay hydrated as much as possible. The organizers of the trip told us, yes, there will be water there. We arrived at the beach, there was water. It wasn't the fresh, bubbling spring that we'd hoped it would be. It was a stagnating bog. It smelt awful, it was lukewarm, and it tasted absolutely horrific. And half our day was spent trying to hand pump a liter every 40 minutes to get this liquid out to drink. And eventually it was just too much. We moved further down the coastline to another area in itself, and that actually had fresh water. And obviously, staying hydration was a difficult process. One of the people on the island actually took to storing his urine in plastic bottles by way of some sort of primitive litmus test to see whether or not he was hydrated or dehydrated, although to this day I'm still a little concerned that it was probably some twisted fetish that only emerged when we were on the island itself. Okay. Just a little bit of toilet talk for you folks. One of the first questions I get asked, how often did you go to the loo? And one of the upsides of not eating anything is that you don't go to the loo all that often. So I went for number 2 twice in 25 days, which is probably a record for anyone here. And we're urinating a lot more than that. In terms of food, guys, there really was very little. It's not as easy as they make it look on the TV or on any sort of movie. We looked everywhere. We tried everything. We tried line fishing, we tried trap fishing, we even tried trapping on land, which was a complete disaster. We didn't catch anything. The only thing that we caught actually caught itself. We had a small see-through bucket with fish heads in, and I picked up this bucket and I was rotating it in my hand, admiring these smelly half creatures, and one of the fish heads blinked at me, and I thought, something's not quite right here. And it was actually this big lizard that had crawled into the bottle. It had caught itself, and myself and this massive bouncer from Joburg spent about 15 minutes trying to kill this thing. And you've not heard screaming like that from Herschel schoolgirls, I'll tell you that much. It was a terrible experience. That's the rudimentary trap that obviously didn't work at all. Guys, I built that, so I'd appreciate you do yourself. So it tastes like very disgusting chicken, more or less. In the end, we found that the best way to actually catch food was by net fishing. We took a small throw net with us. What would happen, two people would swim out, you'd break open a sea urchin, the innards would float outwards, fish would be attracted, the other person would drift over it, they'd drop the net over the fish and then pull it up quickly, and it would actually catch the fish in the process. Thankfully, I took a little bit of rice with me in the 5-litre bag, and I think over the period of the 25 days, I consumed an average of 2 tablespoons every 2 days and lost 11 kgs in the process. Somewhat of a supermodel shape when I returned, some might say. I suppose that many people ask me, listen, Nicholas, would you do it again? If you'd asked me 5 minutes after I left the island, my answer would have been a resounding hell no. But now that I've put a little bit of distance between then and now, I'd say yes, I definitely would do it again. And quite simply, the best way to explain why I do it again is to tell you a small story. So every morning you wake up at 5:30, disappear down to the beach, you swim out 100 meters with another survivor, sun starts to rise, you've got the open ocean behind you, you've got the green island in front of you, the rays reflect off the water, it looks like you're floating on a mirror. In that moment, you think to yourself, there's not a person on this planet with whom I'd swap places with. Guys, a healthy dose of isolation, it's good for me, it's good for all of you too. Thank you so much.